All right. Amy Kelman, I'm going to hand it off to you to sort of kick things off this afternoon for this opera up close for Carmen.
Oh, and of course my notes are downstairs.
Okay, Laura.
What else is new? And we all know Rob very well, and Rob will introduce our other wonderful guests, some of whom we also know very well. I think without further ado, I do like to always point out that Rob was a singer as well. Also is a singer and can be found on the recording of The Good Soldier Frank. I always do that wrong, don't I? And we're very lucky to have him as long as we've had him. And I hope he's not exhausted with two little ones running around the house. Maybe not running yet. Maybe not both of them running yet. Anyway, welcome, and it's lovely to see all of you. And some of you I'm seeing for the first time without a mask.
Oh, that's true. Indeed. Indeed. Thank you, Amy. You're very kind. I always appreciate the plug for The Good Soldier Schweik. My sole recording of my singing career. I'm still waiting for the Grammy Award, but I won't hold my breath. But nonetheless, it does exist out there. And thank you to you, and thank you to the FPO, the Friends of Pittsburgh Opera, for hosting and supporting and sponsoring these events. It's a nice opportunity to kind of touch base with the artists affiliated and associated with the productions and get an. I always say it's a unique experience to sort of have a one-on-one, if you will, with the artists from a production. So that's one of the things I like about Opera Up Close the most, is that all of you who are such dedicated sponsors, patrons, supporters, enthusiasts get an opportunity to sort of sit in the room, listen to a conversation, and frankly join it, hopefully, throughout the course of this hour or so. Without further ado, those of you who can see, I want to introduce my four esteemed guests today. We are incredibly lucky. I want to thank them in advance for sharing a bit of their afternoon on their day off today. So allow me to introduce making her debut with us in the role of Carmen, Zanda Švēde. And am I pronouncing that correctly, Zanda? Am I in the ballpark?
Zanda Švēde.
Say it one more time.
Zanda Švēde.
Švēde.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's good for everybody to hear, including myself. We welcome you. For those people, you were originally slated to be a part of the production 2 years ago, and then due to a wonderful life change, we swapped you out. But due to a number of other circumstances, we are thrilled to have you back with this production this particular year. So welcome, and thank you for joining me. Also on your screen, Danielle Paston singing the role of Micaëla, was slated to sing the role in 2020. We are thrilled that she is back with us, a former resident artist with Pittsburgh Opera, and very happy to have her in the role of Micaëla. The other guest to us all, Garnett Bruce. We are very happy to have him back at the helm of this production. Most recently, he was with us for Tosca a few seasons back. Always a steady hand when it comes to productions at Pittsburgh Opera. We're thrilled that this worked out for him to come back and be with us this time for this remount. And last but certainly not least, our music director, Maestro Antony Walker. Thank you for being with us. A steady hand and friendly face on the podium as always. So we're thrilled to have you helming this production and the musical forces behind it. So thank you to the four of you for being here. I do want to mention, a few people have mentioned this, and it's certainly not lost on me either. Today, of all days, marks the actual 2-year anniversary of the shutdown, when we were in rehearsal. Exactly, Garnett. We were in rehearsal, and Christopher Hahn and Bill Powers walked into the room, and we had all been getting a flurry of information, and the decision was made that we were shutting down. for maybe just 2 weeks or so to see how this goes. And here we are, 2 weeks to the day, and we are thrilled that we're able to come back and present Carmen as we had intended 2 years ago. So we're really happy to be here and to be doing this. Thank you to all of you for all of your patience, all of your dedication, all of your support over these 2 years. We could not have gotten this far without all of you. So we really do thank you on behalf of Pittsburgh Opera for everything that, all the support that you have come and brought to us. So that being said, I want to make sure we dive in because Carmen, while incredibly familiar to most opera-going enthusiasts, is also has this wonderful, complex history and complex fabric, I think, underneath the surface that I'm excited to have a chance to discuss with these 4 guests, because I think while we all know Carmen for its fantastically popular overture, certainly Carmen's 2 famous arias, of course, the Toreador song, Votre Toast, there are so many nuanced layers to this piece of opera that I think it's really rare that we have an opportunity to unpack some of that from my perspective. So it's been really fun digging back into the world of Carmen and Bizet and Prosper Mérimée, the original novelist who wrote the novella. And so I think this is a really a great opportunity to sort of dig into that. Just a few tidbits, some sort of goalposts of history, if you will. The novella written by Prosper Mérimée was first written in 1845. 30 years later, we have the debut of Carmen by Georges Bizet and his 2 librettists. And it was, I would say, a lukewarm reception at first. I'm going to put this out there, and my guests can we can argue this point. I don't know that it was a total failure at first. While it wasn't a runaway hit, I think that there were certainly glimpses of what it could become as it changed, but it did take a minute, quote unquote. It did take a while before it was quite the success that we know it today. But I think that there was a lot of good bones and good material there from the very first that only developed into the popular piece that we know it today. It was premiered at the Opera Comique, and as such, the original had music and dialogue. Later on, a few years later, it had been brought to Vienna, at which point they replaced the dialogue, most, if not all, with sung recitative. And that is the version that essentially took flight and became popular the world over. And for years and years, the only place that you would hear it with the dialogue was back in Paris at the Opera Comique. We here at Pittsburgh are doing the Opera Comique version, i.e. sung musical portions and spoken dialogue connecting those fabrics. So we'll get into a little bit more of that as we get along. But Garnett, I would like to kick things off with my first question of the afternoon to you. And I will say this for the group, there are probably a lot of these questions that very easily could dovetail across all 4 of you. So please feel free to chime in. I will, some of this is just to kind of shepherd the conversation and kick things off, but by all means, this is meant to be a conversation with everyone. So, but Garnett, let me start with you. I would love to hear your take on some of the major differences between the Mérimée novella and then what we know today as the opera itself and the story that we all have come to know through the opera.
Sure. When you read the Prosper Mérimée, it's a flashback told to a traveling narrator. It was a travel log of adventures in southern Spain. And Carmen is a secondary character. Don José is the person who is narrating it. And what Bizet has done is realize that Carmen is actually who we want to know about and is the enigmatic figure in the middle of all of it. And So the music is all about Carmen's point of view in terms of philosophy of the world and how we live, and how she goes through her day. And she is part of this adventure of la liberté, which is something of the freedom from the strictures of society and other people's rules. And both in her job, she's a cigarette girl, and in her off times when she's in the tavern or working with the smugglers, she is a leader in her community and in the city of Seville. And so all of this music surrounds her. And Bizet then created a counterpart from the Mérimée in Micaëla. And Micaëla is a girl from Don José's hometown in the north. And so she becomes the balance to Carmen's sort of earthiness and honesty. I mean, not that you aren't honest, Danielle, right? But you do bring another motive, which is to bring Don José home. José has killed a man at cards and feels he can't be in his hometown anymore. He joined the army, got some structure. He's trying to do well, but he's got a temper, and ignoring Carmen was the wrong choice. And there's a great passage in the novel where Carmen basically says, you know what, you should just leave me alone because I'm going to get you killed. And he's like, no, I want to be with you. And she's like, I'm not sure you do. You may not understand the world I live in. But José wants to be close to her and, has this. And then there's a certain point where he becomes a leech. I mean, Zanda, you may want to say that differently, but by Act 3, she's tired of José's neediness. And certainly by Act 4, she has moved on to the bullfighter. And as she is climbing the social strata of her world. So those are some of the differences of the novella. And also in the novella, José dies too. So we don't get to see that part. So
indeed. So historically speaking, why was it that they added a character of Micaëla? Was there a reason that they decided to put her in? Was it just to,
well,
oh, go ahead.
Contrast is always fantastic. Yeah. And you get to sort of have the people's point of view at the Opera Comique. In many ways, a lot of her music begins in the sentimental romantic heroine that you might know. But even Bizet makes Micaëla a tough girl. She actually travels up into the mountains, looks out for these smugglers, faces her fears, and does indeed bring José home. And then there's Act 4. So, but Antony, you may have more insight into all of that, but with your experience at the Comique, etc.
Well, Micaëla, for me, in some respects, is the strongest character because she has fear, and she, as you said, and she overcomes her fears, and she's very single-minded in her task, which is to bring Don José back to his mother, who's also looked after her. So she has a sort of a daughter's duty to Don José's mother as well, and so there's that added complication, but also motivation for Micaëla. But one of the things I also love about what Bizet achieved with his librettists in Carmen is that at any one moment you can actually you could be rooting for any of the characters on stage, except towards the end when Don José becomes unhinged. But in the first couple of acts, everyone is very true to themselves and very honest, and it's very endearing. And it's one of the things I love about this piece, that it starts off as a lighter opéra comique. The first two acts, you have the soldiers teasing Micaëla, you have Carmen coming in and stating her worldview in a lighthearted way, and just saying, I am who I am, and if I'm interested in you, then just watch out. And you have Don José just trying desperately to redeem himself, because, and it's actually, there's one thing I wanted to bring up, because it's one of, you may ask, why is he called Don José? Don José. Why is he called? Why does he have that that title? Well, he's a member of the Hidalgo class, which I believe still exists in Spain today. But I'm happy to be corrected if I'm wrong about that. But these Hidalgos were basically middle class, upper middle class, and they didn't really have. They didn't have a lot of money, a lot of means, but what they did have was respectability. So Hidalgos regularly became priests or notaries and were supposed to be upstanding members of their community, and be an example to everybody. And it's one of the reasons that Don José is so tortured, because he has let down, he has let down his class, as it were, and by having this incredibly hot temper, killing a man at cards, he traveled literally the length of Spain to try and reinvent himself. He went from the north to the south, and he's just trying to keep a low profile. He's become a soldier. He's not particularly high rank, but he's trying to work his way up and become respectable again, presumably so that he can, earn the approval of his mother once more. And also, his fellow Hidalgos back in the village in the north. So he's got a lot of demons at the beginning of the show, and he's trying to keep to himself, just trying to focus on what he has to do to better himself and atone for what he's done. But yeah, I can't imagine what the first night audience must have thought. They went in expecting this sort of Spanish fantasy. It's like Spanish fantasy with all sorts of wonderful comic characters and lighthearted scenarios. Got the wonderful quintet in Act 2 about the joys of smuggling and trying to jolly Carmen out of her ridiculous notions of being in love. And then how they must have felt in the last scene, which is just terrifying. And takes it's people call Carmen a Verismo opera. It's not, but the last 10 minutes are, and that's why it's one of the reasons it's so extraordinary. Also, Bizet had this incredible knack of creating mood and color, and from the very, very beginning of the prelude, you takes us right into the south of Spain, and we stay there. Every single bar just sort of drips with local color. He did that in Pearl Fishes as well, and L'Arlésienne. He transported us to the south of France. It's sort of Frédéric Mistral's south of France. There are not many composers actually that have that ability to create a scene with so much orchestral, melodic, and harmonic color as Bizet, and that's one of the reasons I think we love this piece. We love this piece so much because it's sort of like watching a movie actually set there.
Indeed. I want to jump to Danielle. And actually, Antony, you mentioned something about the Verismo that I'll try and circle back to a little bit later if we get there. But I want to jump to Danielle while we are still sort of on the Micaëla character and get your take on her as well, because as your character is sort of an invention of these creators for the purpose of the opera comique. What do you think she brings to the story, and then how do you bring that to the stage, and what is her sort of role within the world of the production of this piece?
Well, I think that she can you hear me? Am I unmuted? Yes. Okay. I mean, I think in asking the question before, why is Micaëla here? I think she is a conflict. She's another, the story is better because there's another conflict that Jose is having to deal with. And I think that she's an incredibly strong person, and she's an incredibly strong character. And even though she's not, she's not at the focus of the story really much, except for I'm in the first act and I'm in the third act. But again, as everybody keeps saying, she has traveled across Spain to try to get Jose back home, and I don't know, I like the idea of like in act one where she's possibly a little bit flirtatious with Jose. I mean, you can play it a million different ways, but I think she really does love him and really can see herself with him and having that life with him. And she gives it her best shot. And then furthermore, defies all of her fears and her trepidation. She goes through the mountains to find the smugglers, to find Jose, and to do one last plea to get him back home. And she doesn't ultimately succeed, but he just doesn't stay there.
Indeed. I mean, in some ways, I feel like she's a potential moral compass, or a mirror of morality that she's sort of holding up, and we, the audience, can kind of see these divergent paths. Garnett, I see your furrowing of a brow, but
well, and I think Zanda might agree with me here as well. I mean, Carmen is the most honest character in the piece, not hiding her past, not afraid of the future, and as in terms of a moral compass, I mean, we've kept a line in from the dialogue, which is straight from the novel. Je paie mes dettes. C'est la loi de la bohemienne. Je paie mes dettes. I pay my debts. It's what we do in our culture. Jose got her out of going to prison. She repays by an evening of dancing at Las Pastias. Zanda, I mean, I see you sitting there quietly poised to pounce on anything like this. What's Carmen's moral compass, Zanda?
And I should retract. Maybe moral compass isn't exactly the right turn of phrase, but it's this sort of this foil to a path that Jose is clearly choosing, and it's the sort of good angel, bad angel, if you will.
Well, yeah, don't you think Micaëla is the person he should be going with? He should be with her.
Well, and I think that's one of those things that the audience can decide. Like, do they feel that? I think that's then.
Well, certainly, but I'm actually going with what Maestro said about why is he called Don? And if he's part of this moral order, then Micaëla is the person he should be with if he's following that path. Mm-hmm. And he makes a left turn and goes completely off the rails, but.
Zanda, I haven't looped you in yet, so now is the time. So I have a specific question for you, but I also would love to hear your take on this while we're on this trail.
I actually agree with Danielle that I think Jose should have gone with Micaëla, but Carmen's just so irresistible that it's just not possible for him to make the right choice. And like Antony said in the beginning, it's like he's so troubled with the past and everything that he just he has to stay on the straight and narrow, but he can't. Like, it's just that Carmen presents him this opportunity, and in the same time, we talked with Garnett about this the whole week, that I think what Carmen really likes is a challenge. Like, everything she takes up is a challenge. This man not looking at her is a challenge. Then him not wanting to go back to the army and not staying with her is a challenge. Like, it charges her up, she has to overcome it, but then she loses interest of him, and that's why I think he made a mistake. He should have gone with Micaëla, but then we wouldn't have the opera. So there you go.
It's true. It's very true. You sort of answered my question that I was going to pose in some, because those of us who obviously we love this opera, we love these characters, for be they good, bad, or indifferent, but they're part of the operatic canon. But it is that your take on her being such an iconic character. How do you approach playing Carmen? Because we know her somewhat, but I'd be curious to know how you approach playing this incredibly iconic character in the canon.
For me personally, I think it's important to play all the colors of Carmen. And I think the most important thing is that she takes life as it is, like we talked about, this honesty, or not more, yeah, maybe moral compass, but like the truthfulness of it, that when it's good, she goes for it. Like she takes it, she enjoys it to the deepest. And when the cards say she's gonna die, she's like, well, okay, you know, the cards say die, so that's what I take on. And I think throughout the opera, I find very many moments where she's just enjoying herself, like to the most, dancing, singing, encouraging others, you know, taking up a challenge with a man or two, you know, here and there. Like that's just,
well, and we spoke about how La Liberté being so central when she gets a chance to express this idea.
mm-hmm. Yeah, just I want to do what I want to do, and when I change my mind, then I have changed my mind, and you have no chance anymore.
Do you think that Carmen nowadays has a different resonance than how she was initially conceived or portrayed way back in 1875?
It's hard to say because I don't have a very deep knowledge of Roma culture, but I do know that they have a very strict hierarchy of how women should behave, who they should marry. Like there's lots of arranged marriage, and they're usually the ones that stay home and make the home, and the men go and, you know, earn the money. So I would think that even for their culture, Carmen's actually kind of a rebel, you know, like not really what even the Roma women needed to do in those. So for nowadays, you know, like obviously we can vote and do a lot of things nowadays as women, and like have full lives without anyone telling us what to do. So maybe it does resonate with the viewers differently. But I think that the fact that La Liberté is, you know, not in all countries, not all over the world, something that women can afford to have, it's still super relevant.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I find interesting is that, you know, after the French Revolution, there was the idea of, you know, Marianne La Liberté, you know, the French figure who, you know, who figures in a lot of paintings and I wonder how much of, you know, the success or not. I mean, the conflict of you know, in 1875, when people didn't quite know what to make of Carmen. I mean, you had that was around the time that that women in Paris, at least, were starting to make their own careers, especially in fashion. You know, there were a ton of dressmakers, seamstresses, and bonnet makers, and women in Paris around that time, after the Paris Commune, and we're starting to have middle-class women, or even what could have been, I don't like to use the term, but, you know, lower-class women were really starting to have careers. So it's an interesting time for a figure, a really emancipated, strong female figure like Carmen to suddenly, you know, to suddenly burst on the stage. I don't know. It's just it's a conversational point, which I just find interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and Zanda, while we're here, I'd love to, if we want to just quickly unpack the sort of difference between the use of the term gypsy versus Roma. And Garnett, Antony, Zanda, Danielle, any of you, I'd be happy to hear the take on it and how that, how it functions and your thoughts on that in sort of today's, the differences between those two terms. Zanda, if you want to start, I'd be happy to, or Garnett, do you have any thoughts on those differences that we sort of, the terminology?
I've probably used both words in conversation, but I noticed that Garnett was using Roma culture. So I thought that he was trying to be really conscious. And I have to admit, there are many situations nowadays when you don't know what certain group of people want to be called, and it's usually better to ask them. But like any direct chance. So if out of just trying to be respectful, if that is the last thing I've learned, that's the most respectful term, then I'm happy to use it.
And I just came off a production in Florida a month ago, and we were asked and encouraged to go back to the older term, indicating the Romani, because gypsy has become derogatory in so many places and associated with beggar or worse. Mm-hmm. And so let's free it from that connotation and know that these are folks who were nomadic and but had a very strong, as you said, a code of ethics within them, not necessarily what we understand from the Roman Catholic or Protestant ethic, but that's the other great thing about this story being set in Andalusia, is that this has been a region where there's a clash of cultures at all times. I mean, we go back to the Islamic days, and then the arrival of the Jewish scholars, and then the Roman Catholic Church, and then Ferdinand and Isabella pushing everybody into North Africa. But when you go to Seville and Cordoba and Malaga, you see all of these influences in the architecture and the streets and in the heritage, and also the Roma culture, who felt that they could make their way in this part of Spain. And the smugglers, who have light opera comique music, are actually pretty serious and dangerous characters. So I want to respect both the race and the culture of the Roma. That's where I have turned this time, but I say sometimes we'll use the terms interchangeably in terms of gypsy in the best sense of the word. But we know more now, so it's part of our duty as we tell the story again to teach and expand its range rather than limit it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oh, Antony.
Yeah, it's interesting because also in Spain, some Roma are known as gitano or gitana as well. So that's another appellation that may not be familiar to our audience, but some of the gitanos were Gitano communities were extremely conservative Roman Catholic, which is, I think, what Zanda was alluding to with does if Carmen was a gitana, then she's really living outside the confines of the very strict Gitano community. I'm a bit fuzzy about in Seville whether what type of Roma that was Merime was really referring to, but I think it was I think he was referring to a Gitano or Gitana type of Roma. Gypsy is also interesting because it has the etymology of the word comes from Egypt, doesn't it? So there was when nobody knew where Roma came from, they hypothesized that they may have come from Egypt, and so that's another reason why it's sort of like well, no, because originally they did come from North India, I believe. Yeah, so that's and as Garnett said, there was this sort of derogatory association with the term. Garnett and I both visited Seville, Garnett more recently than I, or than me. I visited 4 years ago to celebrate my 50th birthday. I've always been fascinated by Andalusia and Seville and Cordoba, Granada, Cadiz, Malaga. I used to be sort of fascinated by flamenco culture. I knew a few flamenco dancers. I even dated one 30 years ago. And it's just a fascinating culture, which overlaps Roma culture a little, well, more than a little, somewhat. And the sort of the idea in flamenco, the idea of sort of destiny and fate and life being really hard. But, expressing your passions, through the dance, even though life is exceptionally hard, it's just forged a really fascinating dance form. And I don't know whether if any of your any of people on this Zoom here have seen the film Strictly Ballroom. There is a Spanish flamenco dancer, Antonio Vargas, who's the father of the female dancer. And I knew Antonio. I'd worked with him quite a few times. And he introduced me to flamenco through La Vida Breve of Manuel de Falla. So it's, I just fell in love with the extraordinary cultures, because it's not just one culture in the south of Spain. It's many. But in Seville, the district, the Triana, which is on a little island in the middle of the Guadalquivir River, just across the road from the bull ring, really, and not far from the old tobacco factory. There are still small groups of Roma that live in their enclosed communities on that island, which is just like a mile from the center of Seville, and so the cultures still coexist, which I find really, really fascinating and really exciting. And of course, there's always potential for conflict as well. Sorry, that was a total digression. You'll forgive me, but it just might. But I love that part of Spain so much. And when you throw in the Moorish influence as well, it's just such a fascinating melting pot of peoples.
Indeed, a worthy digression, nonetheless. I do want to make sure that we and a worthy discussion, because I think the Garnett, to your point, as we have progressed in society and using different terminology, it is our sort of duty to educate, and then educate and yet honor the original concept. Would that be accurate? I mean, obviously it was written in 1875 under a completely different social construct, but while the terminology has evolved, do we still, as artists, honor the original intention or the original manuscript, if you will, of the piece?
Well, I mean, the characters from great literature. I mean, we still talk about Oedipus, and through the years, we reinterpret the great works and the great music. I mean, whether we listen to Mozart or Verdi or Bizet or Puccini or Benjamin Britten, we are in that process in the rehearsal hall examining it. And when you have artists who come from a variety of backgrounds with a variety of experiences, we have fantastic dialogues about, what's the significance? What do we show? What have we learned? What's better? What's worse? What makes sense today? And what gives us the sense of the story? And Anthony, we can quibble over verismo, but I love the truth and honesty that comes through in the piece as a whole, in the whole arc of it. And that's what I've asked of the cast, and I've asked of the designers, is to make sure that everything feels honest. And that way we can have confidence in that, in our process. And so we are honestly dancing. We're not honestly shooting guns. That's true. But, we have honest water on stage in the first scene. We have, as much as we can. The rocks aren't very honest either, but they look good.
They were honestly made.
So far, the oranges are not all that honest.
It's funny. It's funny you should mention Garnett. It's funny you should mention Oedipus, because you can't discuss Oedipus or Don José without referring to their mothers.
So I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about structure and the piece itself, because as I mentioned early on, we are doing the opera comique, the sung portions with dialogue as it was originally conceived. Yet years later, it went on to Vienna, where it was recomposed, if you will, or the dialogue was done away with, and they composed recitatives not by Bizet. And so, Antony, I would love to hear you talk a little bit about that from a musical sense, and why that was the case, how that resulted in a slightly different piece, and what that sort of looked like at that point after the original premiere.
Well, I think that the most important thing to realize, I guess, about spoken dialogue versus sung récit is that the sung récit were, I guess, indicated a slightly higher tone of what you would see at the opera. If you went to the opéra comique and there was more dialogue, the opéra comique came from sort of not very pretentious beginnings. It was just little pieces, very light-hearted pieces that were basically plays with a few songs in them. Sort of light-hearted entertainment. And then by the time we get to the middle of the 19th century, opéra comique had become quite sophisticated, but it was still considered the sort of the slightly the slightly less successful sibling of the grand opera. And I think one of the things, and grand opera was also getting towards that sort of jettisoning the type of stories that were either just set in classical Greece and Italy, or just amongst kings and queens of some description, and grand opera was coming more down to the level of especially in post-revolutionary France, where kings and queens were frowned upon. A lot of lives were lost to overturn that regime. So middle class people with middle class aspirations, or middle class people, or lower class people were. Sorry, I hate using those terms, but that's just that's just the way it was seen. The stories of grand opera gradually dispensed with kings and queens and mythology and came, and so grand opera was sort of coming down in its aesthetic, as it were, and opéra comique was coming up, and they were almost very, very close together. And one of the things that was different about them is that one had spoken dialogues and one had sung. And I think in order to try and establish Carmen as a really really bona fide opera, it was decided that sung recitatives needed to be to be composed, and it's also easier as theaters got bigger and bigger. It's hard, it's harder and harder to do lots of dialogues. I mean, what we're presenting now in terms of dialogues is, as anyone who sees any edition of Carmen with the dialogues in it, they're about, I would say, a conservative estimate, 6 times, there's 6 times the amount of dialogue that was originally written in Carmen. Would you think that's about right, Garnett?
I have definitely selected the best lines for our production.
Yes, absolutely. And it's important that that's the case, because, you know, Carmen is long enough as it is, and you know, and you know, with all the additional dialogues, it would be at least, I think, half an hour or 3/4 of an hour longer, at least. And so, you know, back in the day in Paris, you know, of the 1870s, that would have been just de rigueur. You would have expected to hear a ton of dialogue, and a ton of more information, background information about characters, because you wouldn't have read it so much in the program notes. You would have experienced it, right? We tend to give our audiences now a lot more information about what they're going to see than audiences in Paris at that time would have been given. So someone who knew Bizet, Ernest Guiraud, was charged with the task of writing these récits. You know, they're fine, but they don't sound like Bizet, because Bizet had a completely unique voice. And so
and Antony, we should probably say the reason Bizet didn't write them himself is Bizet died.
He was dead, yes.
Excuses.
I know, right? Yeah, but I think it's increasingly more popular to present this version, the original version, with truncated dialogues, just because it's more visceral, I find, and also allows, as Garnett was saying in rehearsal, allows the cast to make more decisions for themselves in those moments about how they're going to play certain scenes and how they're going to inflect them, which I think is really wonderful.
That's a perfect segue to my next question, if you will, because Zanda and Danielle, this is not your role debut for either of you, correct? You have both done this role before. Have you done it with? Have you done both a dialogue version and the recitative version prior to? And so, Danielle, I'll ask you first, but Zanda certainly as well. Do you prefer one over the other, and why?
I would agree with Maestro that I think the dialogue version is more dramatic and more visceral, for sure. It doesn't. I mean, I like doing either version personally from my my contribution to the show. I enjoy doing both versions. Watching it, if I'm an audience member, I prefer the dialogue version. I think it is a lot more impactful. But I will also just throw it out there that I don't have a ton of dialogue, so it's a slightly easier demand for me. But certainly from an audience perspective, I think that it is definitely a more impactful. And I also agree that while this show is not verismo in the traditional sense, the last act is 100%. I mean, it is full throttle. They're saying what they're meaning what they're saying, and it's you know, it's I can't think of a way to say this without being inappropriate, which I guess goes along with being very it being
Verismo.
right?
Needless to say, by Act 4, the pedal is on the floor.
There you go. That's a good way to say it. There you go.
We are barreling toward a tragic end, to say the very least. And Bizet, to Antony, to your point, I mean, it illustrates that in the music. I mean, that Act 4 music is just, you can hear it almost coming, which is kind of amazing. Zon, the same question for you as an actor. Do you prefer one version over the other when you take on this role?
I say usually the words over the music are easier to memorize, so dialogue presents its challenges for singing people. So, yeah, it's just a different challenge. I made my role debut with dialogue, and then ever since that time I had not done it. So it's kind of revisiting it 6 years later. It's challenging, but I think we're getting a hang of it. It's fun.
Yeah, Garnett, as a director, and as we know, this is not your first Carmen rodeo, having just done it prior to, and I'm sure several productions before that. Do you have a preference? Have you done it in both ways?
I have done both, and I would say that if there is very little rehearsal time, or the conductor is emphatic about how the pacing will go, it is best to do the recipe because the conductor is in charge at all times. But when you have a process and you have someone who's as engaged as Antony is and a cast that is as game and brings as much to the table, you want to explore these characters and the depth that you have in the dialogues. I mean, I made editorial choices months ago about which lines we keep, but oftentimes, you know, we'll get to rehearsal and someone will say, I prefer saying this, or I don't need to say that, or I don't need to say that again. You know, so there's always room for a give and take, but it opens up discussions and inflections. And Zanda, I mean, I must say, I love hearing you laugh. We don't always get to hear Carmen laugh. And in the dialogues, you know, there's a playfulness that you have to your delivery, which is, you know, revelatory, I must say, and shines a new perspective on who she is and what she wants and how she moves through the world. And that's been a joy this week. And I hope that that will transfer to our audience.
Yeah.
Garnett, do you have a source material that you started with in terms of the dialogue that you brought, because that it was given to us by you, and so do you have a source material from which you draw?
I do. The Avant-scènes d'opéra, which are the French opera sort of manuals, come with a bunch of articles and a strong libretto and pictures of other things, and so I go from there. I was lucky enough to study French in school. I mean, I'm not an AP French speaker, but I read French comfortably. And so using sort of a theater background, finding things that help bring moments of the characters alive that we wouldn't know otherwise. And like the Je paie mes dettes. And also even for Micaëla, you know, je reviendrai. I'll be back. I don't want to read this letter. And the interrogation of Carmen in the first act is so much fun when it's spoken.
Oh, yes.
Because the lieutenant is saying, speak up, I need your answer. And Carmen responds with a song. Tra-la-la. Like, I didn't ask for a song, I asked for an answer. Tra-la-la-la-la-la. So, I mean, Zanda, talk to me about, you know, your second act when the lieutenant says, when you were sent to prison.
Yeah. Oh, I did prison. I don't know what it's about.
Yeah. So
Sure. Yeah.
Zanda or Danielle, one of the questions that came up in the chat to me, are either of you French speakers at a certain level?
No.
Ew.
Do you do you find it particularly challenging to pull the dialogue out of the music? Zanda, you sort of alluded to this earlier, because obviously trained singers, there's that other layer of music underneath that supports the libretto, but in this case it's all out there. And do the two of you find that challenging as non-native French speakers?
I certainly do. I think another point to that is that French is sung differently than it is spoken. There are like elisions and things that we do while we're singing, and so we learn to do that singing, and then suddenly we have to erase that and speak. And if you're doing it simultaneously within the same production, it definitely makes it challenging. I'm in a unique position because Maestro Antony Walker was one of the people who taught me this role from when I covered it at Pittsburgh Opera. So I actually learned the role partly with Antony and with the music staff at Pittsburgh Opera. So you know, I was in good hands from the start.
So we're sort of coming up on the hour. We're at the hour, and I want to respect everybody's time. I want to respect your day off. But I like to end these sessions with a question. We'll go sort of around the horn. We all know and love at different levels the opera Carmen. I would love to hear kind of what you hope the audience takes away from either this production or as an artist who is so ingrained in this production or the work itself. What's something that maybe the audience won't know, or just in general, what you hope they take away from from when these fine folks come and see it? Antony, I'll start with you.
Oh goodness, where to start? I mean, I always find I always like to be the composer's advocate, and I try to take an approach. I always try to look at a score afresh, and try to present it in the freshest way possible. Just looking at what the composer is telling me, and then listening to what the director wants to achieve, and try to help him or her in that regard. Just listening and observing to the singers and seeing their personalities and what they want to do with the piece, and see how I can support that as well. And so I guess the thing is that I want I always want every piece I conduct to seem fresh, so that the audience feels like they're experiencing it for the first time, even though with something like Carmen they know it very well. I'm very passionate about French style and trying to present Carmen as a French opera, not as an opera often sung by people who usually sing Italian repertoire. I mean, or Spanish repertoire. We had a lot of the very fine recordings that come down to us from post World War II are sung mostly by Italian and Hispanic singers. And so trying to reclaim a little bit of that for in a French style. And I love the fact that there's dance. So one of the reasons I was bringing up the flamenco is that in this world in Seville, which is one of the homes of flamenco dancing, dance flamenco and Roma and Gitano and is everywhere in Seville, along with the wonderful classical Spanish aspects of it as well. So we have Attack Theatre, the wonderful Attack Theatre, joining us with two dancers, Peter and Sarah, and Zanda is dancing too, and Frasquita and Mercedes are also dancing, and it's that brings a wonderful freshness into it as well, and you can't I want everyone coming out of this and feeling that they've been seduced by the freshness of the production, the honesty of and vigor and fervor of all the singers, and also the few dance moments in there, and also the fact that it's the first big opera that we're doing back at the Benedum. We did Magic Flute, which is fantastic, and it was a wonderful way to get back into the Benedum. But Carmen is one of the iconic pieces with a big chorus, big orchestra, a large cast, great tunes, and it's just got everything. It's got absolutely everything, and I hope people will just be blown away by the totality of it. So it was an incredibly long-winded.
Spot on.
But I'm very excited about it all, and I'm very excited about the fantastic cast that we have, and I'm very excited about, as Garnett was saying, about Zanda's, her playfulness in the first couple of acts is so refreshing, and it's just exactly the way I feel. Carmen is portrayed best in the first couple of acts to make the tragedy really that unfolds that more alarming and moving.
Indeed. Garnett, any thoughts of what you hope an audience might hope to walk away with?
Yeah, violence is stupid. And I mean, that a beautiful, fierce, independent, strong-willed character is snuffed out because Don Jose can't control his temper is the great tragedy of the piece. And I want us to miss and mourn Carmen and hopefully break the cycle of violence. I mean, that's what I hope anybody walks away with.
Indeed. Danielle and Zanda, before we ask you a question posed quickly, was how do you keep your French fresh throughout this process? Do you run
it all the time?
Say, Zanda, sorry?
With Maestro's help. He helps us all. Correct. It's always very fresh.
Indeed. Danielle, hopes something that the audience can take away from this production?
I hope that the audience is really on Micaëla's side. I know that Carmen is such a great character, but and so is Micaëla, so is Don Jose. I really want for people to see the strength in Micaëla and for them to be rooting for her, because I think she's stronger than sometimes she's often portrayed. And I'm glad that in this production, I have a little bit more, chutzpah right out of the gate, which I certainly appreciate because, I have total mezzo envy over the role of Carmen. If I could, I would try to tackle that role in a heartbeat. I love what I sing, but
If there's any singer out there that we know that has chutzpah, it is absolutely you, Danielle. So and so I will give the last word to Zanda, our title character. Any thoughts, any parting thoughts that you'd like the audience to come away with from this production?
We were talking about the honesty, how we portray the characters honestly. So what I always hope is that the audience will relate with what they see with the relationships. They're set in a different century, in a different setting, but that they're going to take away something for themselves in today. And Garnett made me cry from what he said, and he's absolutely spot on, right about, that kind of context in today's world. But also knowing that this is, the first, it's somewhat a comeback and something that has been canceled 2 years ago and now is coming back. I am absolutely certain the audience will see how excited we all are to do it. How there's just every single person on the stage are giving themselves to this piece, and I hope they see it and I hope they enjoy it.
Indeed. Well, to all of you, you are absolutely in for a treat. If you've never seen Carmen, which I'd be hard pressed to believe, you are absolutely in for a treat. But even if you have, this cast is terrific. We are thrilled to have with us Zanda and Danielle, Maestro Walker on the podium, and Garnett, your leadership shepherding this story through. So thank you to all of you. Thank you for spending this hour with me this afternoon. And thank you to everybody out there who was joining us this afternoon to listen and be a part of this conversation. We really appreciate it, and really can't wait to give this piece over to our loyal audience in just a few weeks. So with that, I will bid everybody adieu and have a wonderful afternoon, and we will see you all soon. Take care.
Bye-bye, everyone.